Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Brandon Rose, and welcome to the Department of State and the U.S. Agency for International Development Google Hangout for Prospective 2015 PMFs. We're excited that you've taken the time to join us to hear more about the PMF program. And I just want to tell you a little bit about the Presidential Management Fellows Advisory Council here at State and AID. We're an employee affinity group, and we advocate on behalf of current and former PMFs, and we provide a professional support community to our members. So this year, we're particularly interested in kind of doing our part to make sure that potential applicants have the right information to be able to start their own journeys as PMFs. Essentially, that's the purpose of this panel, and we're really excited that you could join us. We decided to do this through Google Hangouts since we know that historically PMFs have been disproportionately from the kind of East Coast, especially the Washington, D.C. area schools, and we want to make sure that we're able to reach people that are actually across the country who may not be in public policy programs where there's kind of an immediate pipeline into the PMF program. So the PMF program, just generally speaking, is a great way to get into public service with the federal government. And today our panel is going to discuss a bit about the application process, the appointment process, and what it's like to be a PMF at USAID or the State Department. Hopefully we can convince you that this is something worth looking into as the application window opens next week for about 2 weeks. So let's go ahead and just kick things off with a round of introductions. I can just quickly talk about myself. I'm Brandon Rose. I work at the Department of State in the Executive Secretariat in an office called the Research and Design Center. I am a data strategist in this office. I'm a 2013 PMF, and in graduate school I studied public policy. So I want to hand things over to Audrey, and then we'll go Audrey, Neil, Chase, and Elizabeth, and then Greg.
Thanks, Brandon. My name is Audrey Shia. I'm a 2014 PMF working in the Bureau of Political Military Affairs in the Department of State. I'm a compliance officer within that office, and I studied security studies at Georgetown University. Passing it on now to Neil.
Hi, thanks, Audrey. My name is Neil Carter. I work at the Department of State Bureau of Budget and Planning. I'm a budget analyst there. I'm actually a 2012 PMF, which means I started 2 years ago and I just recently converted, which means I just recently finished the program. I studied public policy at the University of Michigan Ford School of Public Policy, and pass things over to Chasen.
Hi, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Chasen Smith. I'm a 2013 PMF at USAID, United States Agency for International Development. I work in the U.S. Global Development Lab at USAID as a partnerships advisor. I earned my Master's of Public Administration from Columbia School of International and Public Affairs, where I focused on international security policy, conflict management, and just management in general. So excited to join you all.
I'm Elizabeth Vish. I'm a 2013 PMF. Today is actually my 1-year anniversary of my start date at State. So I am in the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs, and I'm in the Office of Monetary Affairs, which is, we do a lot with macroeconomic growth and debt management. So I'm a 2013 PMF. I went to Johns Hopkins School of International Studies, Johns Hopkins SICE, here in DC. I studied economics there, so that's how I ended up in the Econ Bureau. And I also studied Southeast Asia. Yeah, pass it on to Greg.
Hi everyone, I'm Greg Engelhoff. I am a PMF at USAID, and I work in the Office, or the Bureau of Economic Growth, Education, and the Environment in the Office of Economic Policy. I'm an economist there, and I'm a 2014 PMF. In graduate school, I studied economics, energy, and environmental policy, and I attended the Johns Hopkins School of International Studies, SICE, as well. So I'll hand it back to Brandon.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. And so for everybody that's watching, we've got a really representative crowd here of panelists for you, and the places that these folks work are really representative of the types of opportunities that PMFs have at State and USAID, so keep that in mind. And also, I want to remind everybody who's watching, feel free to use the question and answer functionality, and if you do have questions live, don't hesitate to ask them. We did receive a bunch of questions beforehand, and we'll definitely try to address those, but if you hear something that spurs something on the moment, please definitely ask. So just to kick things off, I was hoping maybe Elizabeth that you could give a little bit of an overview of the PMF program and why it's a great way to get into the federal government, and then anybody else, feel free to jump in.
Thanks. Yeah, so I started looking at federal government jobs about a month after the sequestration budget cuts hit. So I've been interested in public service for my whole life. Both my parents are public servants. And I had spent some time in the NGO sector as well. And when I was looking at my postgraduate degree career, I looked at a lot of different ways to get into the federal government. One of the things that I really love about PMF is that you get in sort of on a really fantastic track where, you maybe start at the level, entry level coming out straight from graduate school, but you are really mentored and trained and brought into positions where you have lots of opportunities very quickly. So I think that's why the PMF has been a really great opportunity for me. The alumni network is also fantastic, and the other thing to think about is it's a sort of, if you get through the PMF pool to become a finalist, you're in a pre-competed pool, and that's a federal government speak term that sort of means that it's a lot easier for federal government hiring managers to hire you because you've already been, guaranteed that you would be qualified at least at the GS9 level. They've compared you against others, and so once you're accepted as a PMF, you're sort of in this group that hiring managers can really fairly rapidly make offers to, and they can often do that in scenarios where the budget might be a little bit more tight, which was really the case for me when I graduated from graduate school. It is a long process, and it's a highly competitive process. So it's definitely one where you want to keep other sort of irons in the fire while you're engaged in PMF in the application process. But I'm really glad I'm here, and I think it's provided me with a lot of opportunities.
So I'm curious to the group, how does being a PMF differ from being a regular federal employee?
So Brian, sorry, don't mean to talk over you. I can acquiesce to you, Jason.
I can just jump in, and there are sure a lot of good answers, but I can give one perspective. I think one thing PMF affords in the federal government that not every employee necessarily has is this extensive alumni network. I know at USAID and at State, and I'm sure all the other agencies, there's a long legacy of PMFs. So coming in as a brand new PMF, it's not difficult to sit down and have lunch with a PMF who's been 10 years in the agency, and by this point is a senior manager within the agency. So you have this extensive network, and I feel like PMFs do really well at sort of looking out for each other and helping each other understand how to sort of navigate that agency and how to grow in your career. So that, first of all, right there, the alumni network is phenomenal. And then I think the second thing I've noticed, even though I'm fairly brand new, I came on in July, the thing that I've noticed as well is there's such a great sort of reputation PMFs. So sort of whatever office you're in, or when you're talking to the missions in the field, almost everyone understands what PMF is, and sort of that sort of pre-competed exclusive sort of path you have to go through to get into PMF. And PMFs just set sort of a they sort of, from my experience, it seems they sort of have a reputation for sort of doing really good work, and so you have all that wind behind you and in your sales as you start off.
Awesome, thanks, Jason. So let's keep going. I think we kind of talked a little bit about what attracted folks to public service. I'm curious about the PMF application process, kind of what the written exam looked like. So, well, I guess maybe we could talk about sort of the written exam, the oral assessment, the career fair, the appointment process, and maybe Audrey, since you had some thoughts there, you could kick it off by talking a little bit about what it looks like when you first apply.
Sure, Brandon. But just wanted to caveat all of the really great reflections that Jason and Elizabeth had mentioned in terms of the PMF and the prestige in terms of being pre-competed carries. One thing that the PMF process really also highlights is the true nobility of public service. A lot of people that ultimately become PMFs are very well qualified. In fact, they're qualified above and beyond the GS9 positions, and yet the fact that we readily accept the GS9 position really demonstrates and underscores the fact that everybody within this program is really committed to the greater ideals and of public service. But going back to the question of the written application, so to everybody who's listening and watching, best of luck to you as the application window opens within the next couple of days or so. Having been in this position roughly a year ago, I remember that it's a very exhausting sort of a process because there's many different components. You have a personality test followed by a sequence of video scenarios where you have to watch and then pretty much pick an option of one that is most effective and one that is least effective. And these scenarios are a collection of workplace scenarios where you look at it and it seems a little strange and you're wondering like how you would react. And the PMF OPM offers different sort of options. You're like, well, I'm not sure which one. I guess my only recommendation to that is don't think about it too much. Just kind of go with your gut instinct, and particularly if you have work experience, kind of your previous experience will guide you towards the best answer. After the video scenarios, you have these essays. And one thing that I would recommend is you can actually look at the essays before you complete them. And so I would recommend looking at the essay prompts before you write them. Before you fill them out, and kind of take some time and chew it over, and develop it over a Microsoft Word document such that when you're done with the personality tests and the video prompts, you're able to pretty much copy and paste your answers there. Would definitely recommend having all of that done in one shot, so take about 2 to 3 hours to fill it out. OPM recommends 2 to 3 hours. I would say 2 to 3 hours is a pretty fair shot. Let me know, panel, if I'm missing anything.
I think you have probably done it most recently, other than Jason and or Greg, perhaps. Neil, we might be stretching back in your memory.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts? Because I do know that they pretty regularly change it year to year. So what was true in one year may not be necessarily true in the next. But I welcome any of your thoughts on this.
Yeah. So Brandon, just to kind of reflect. So right now it's 2014. I was going through this process 3 years ago. So it was 2011, my second year in grad school, when I was going through this process. And what Audrey just said, a lot of that was the same sort of process then. I remember in particular the essay portion, and I think there were either only 1 or 2 essays that I had to complete. And it gave you a prompt, and they specifically say during the process, do not talk about the kind of questions that are asked on the application. So even if I could remember, I couldn't really talk about that. But I would agree with Audrey. They give you a lot of the same, a lot of sort of prep or ways to prep beforehand. They won't tell you the exact prompts on what to write about, but you can write about and talk about some very general things. And again, this is 3 years ago when I was doing it. It's changed since then. But yeah, it's exactly what I did was I wrote out the essay. I had my laptop. I went to my school one Saturday morning, and I had everything set up. And then after taking the written test portion of it, I was able to basically copy and paste my essay into the field that they gave me. So it's bottom line, as much as you possibly can, you want to do the legwork, you want to prep, and I would also mention too, practice interviews with your classmates and some other folks who are also applying to the PMF program. I remember doing that with a buddy. We went to the Career Center. We got a list of questions that typical interview questions that they had, and we just drilled each other. We gave each other interviews, and on top of that, our Career Center up at the University of Michigan has a very robust sort of preparation pipeline for prospective PMFs. So definitely get in touch with your respective career centers, see what sort of resources they have to get you through the process.
And I'd also jump in here and say, I think that I also use some resources that are available to everyone that I found really helpful. GovLoop and Partnership for Public Service, I think, put together some resources that are relevant for PMFs. I remember, I think, Path to PMF. .org maybe, or something along those lines. So there's a lot of guides out there, and they'll have updated information about what the process looks like this year. And the real definitive sort of actual guidelines that OPM puts out, those are the like your first reference. So make sure you read all of those, understand what they are. And OPM will talk about the timeline as well. They've moved up the written assessment a little bit earlier this year, which I think is helpful because it's good to know, sort of get that started earlier, and then hopefully that'll mean at some point you'll hear, those who hear about finalist status will hear about it a bit earlier. So there's the written assessment, and then you're invited to in-person assessment later on. I think I took that in January.
Hey, Elizabeth, real quick question for you. Since I know that you have experience writing now in government versus writing in graduate school.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if you have any tips for kind of how you might approach writing something, knowing that it's going to be read very quickly, probably, and how to make that stand out. Understanding that there's sort of a different style that you would approach things with in government, probably than you would when you're writing, say, a thesis.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I looked at the PMF application process almost more like a college application essay, in the sense that you want to have so for me, the PMF essay, I wanted to have a little bit of a hook. I wanted to have, why is it that you should pay attention to me, and why is it that I'm a really good candidate? So for me, those essays were very different from the kind of writing that I do in government. But at the same time, you always sort of want to get to the point quick, because people don't have a lot of time. I think there were, in my year, 12,000 applicants. So that I don't think that they read all 12,000 essays. I don't even think they looked at all 12,000 essays. But they're definitely not going to have a lot of time to read carefully. Obviously, basic writing skills like clear, concise, no grammatical mistakes, those kinds of things, good word choice, those all matter in your essays.
Awesome. So maybe Greg, you could talk about your experience at the oral assessment, and also I think Elizabeth, you were about to discuss sort of what the oral assessment is. So maybe Greg, you could piggyback on that and kind of demythologize that process.
Sure thing. And I might not have the clearest memory. However, I think I remember it pretty well. So I took my oral assessment back in, I want to say February, and the basic components that the OPM handbook lays out are very true, and that's exactly what you'll see. So what I mean by that is you'll have a group interview portion where you'll have an exercise, you'll have some kind of personal interview, and then some kind of writing exercise. So what helped for me, and I'll second what Neil said here, is practicing interviewing beforehand with a friend. And once you read the OPM manual that lays out what they're looking for in a PMF, I would recommend practicing the exact kind of answers you would give word for word if somebody asked you directly, how do you demonstrate this attribute that we're looking for in PMFs? How do you demonstrate your commitment to public service, for example? And I found that practicing that beforehand was extremely helpful in the personal interview portion. And for the rest, I would second what Audrey said. And remember that when you get to that oral interview stage, that means that they already think that you're worthy of going to that oral interview stage. So don't worry about whether you're going to be the kind of person they're looking for. Don't worry too much about getting the exact correct answers. Just remember that they saw something they liked in you at that point. And so be true to yourself and what your experience is. Speak to your experience. Speak to what brought you to the PMF process. Speak to why you're interested in public service genuinely. And that, I think, will shine through more than anything. And I would also second something that Elizabeth said, which is that you want to get directly to the point, but it always helps to have some kind of hook. So when you think about, for example, answering an interview question, if they ask you about what drew you to the PMF process, for example, speak honestly to that, but then think and maybe practice with a friend about what is it that maybe makes you a special candidate. Bounce that off a friend beforehand, see if they think that it is a great hook or not. And those kinds of little things that you practice beforehand can help in the actual day of the interview. In terms of the logistics of it, I think there are multiple sites where you can do the oral. I know I did mine in DC, and it's a bit, well, at least in my case, it was a bit like spending an entire day in meetings at an office building, because we were in an office building, and we went from like station to station doing different parts of the interview. And there's lots of wait time, and that's something that because of that, they recommend that you bring a snack, for example. And so those kinds of things just require some patience, know that everything is coming in its own time, and that if you stick to what brought you there in the first place, then I think that leads to more success. And have a little fun. I think everyone there is going to be really interesting. I found it was fun to talk to people in between the different stages of the interview. Even if I was incredibly nervous about what came next, it still helped me to understand, oh, we're all this really interesting cohort of people, and that helped a lot. So talk to people around you and learn about them, because you'll understand more about what kind of people join the PMF process too in that way. That's useful.
And what's funny about that is actually when I took the oral assessment, I took it with somebody who now works at the State Department, and I see on a regular basis. So make friends. Also, to Greg's point, that at the point of the oral assessment, they're actually really, I think they're looking to find their finalists in a really positive way, not in a really negative way. So they're not looking to cut a whole bunch of people. Actually, the cost associated with testing PMFs, particularly with that oral assessment, because it requires OPM personnel to actually be on the ground in different cities. Federal agencies pay OPM, I believe, $7,000 or maybe $10,000 per PMF that they hire, just because of the costs associated with all of this testing, the kind of rigorous application process. Did anybody take the oral assessment in a city other than Washington, D.C.? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I did.
I don't know, though, if this coming year it's going to be available or not.
Oh, okay. Well,
yeah.
Frank, did you have options to take it out of DC?
Yeah, for the record, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I took it in Chicago because it was only a couple hours from Ann Arbor. So I I think took the train out there, and there weren't a lot of us out there, but and there were different blocks throughout the day. So I think there was one or two other people in my block in that particular time of the day. And I actually remember him at the job fair a few months later, and we were able to catch up then. I believe he's at the VA right now. So another sort of way to kind of network and meet new people and connect with others that you wouldn't normally connect with.
If I could jump in, I would encourage, I'd really encourage people, kind of going back to the written even, it's a program that they really emphasize public service and they emphasize leadership. And I think, people have said it very well, to be yourself, but also I definitely like what Greg and Neil were mentioning, the practice beforehand, to practice the type of questions that would be in an interview like this. And what I found really helpful was sort of the publicly available resources on OPM's, the PMF website. And there's a frequently asked question or a sort of just like a 6 to 8 page type of overview. And also on the PMF website, you can kind of find the characteristics they describe for sort of a PMF. And to start really beforehand, before you even take the written test, start thinking about some of those characteristics and think about yourself and your own experiences and your stories and what sort of exemplified those characteristics, because that's what they've already put out there and identified as this is what we think a leader is, this is what we think a public servant is, the type of public servant we want to sort of nurture in government. So to whatever extent you can kind of match sort of your experience and your skill set and your uniqueness to sort of the characteristics they hope to find, I think it's a big benefit. And the other thing I really want to put out there real quick is I've also heard this year and seen, in fact, on the PMF website, there's a new, not new, I guess they did it last year too, but there's a track for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics PMFs, which I don't know how they go about testing them or separating them out or whatnot, but that might be something to consider too if you're a candidate who's sort of interested in those type of fields. You might be in a more select pool even of candidates. So that's also something to consider.
Jason, that's a great point. I believe that the PMF STEM application process is essentially the same, but to qualify you have to be graduating with a certain degree. I do know that some positions are PMF STEM eligible only positions. So you'll notice if you look on the OPM website that a significant number of the PMFs that were appointed to positions at NIH, the National Institutes of Health, for example, are PMF STEM positions. I believe that Masters in Public Health, an MPH makes you STEM eligible. I'd also add to what Jason said, actually, I believe that the precepts that Jason referenced, I believe that you're actually kind of discreetly measured against in the application process. I don't think that that's ever sort of stated, but I would probably operate on that assumption, and I think it's a safe one to operate on, and I would certainly recommend that you do as well, and make sure that you're able to present yourself as mapping, like Jason mentioned, to all of those various precepts.
And you know what, if I could say one more thing sort of around the test idea, the other piece of advice I would give to everyone is, you have all of these PMFs here who are from great schools, and the PMFs come from schools all across the country, and the schools are really interested in getting more of their alumni as PMFs. So I would encourage people, as you're thinking about the test, to reach out to either if you know PMFs from your school, or even just reach out to your career and alumni networks, and they will link you with PMFs. And then you can have people you can actually talk to on the phone or in person and really sort of ask even more questions than you might ask here. So I encourage you to do that as well.
So I see that there is a live question asking a little bit more about the PMF STEM program. I don't know too much more about it, and I don't believe any of us are PMF STEM, so please correct me if I'm wrong.
No.
I wanted to add to one thing that I said about it. Some positions are PMF STEM only positions because they are technical. They are a science, technology, engineering, or math position in the federal government, and you could probably imagine what those might be. Jobs at places like NIH or the Department of Energy, for example. But I do know that the State Department will hire PMF STEMs. So if you have a STEM background and want to apply as a PMF STEM, I don't think that that will harm you if you're interested in applying for positions at the State Department or at USAID. I think that you may have to kind of sell yourself a little bit, but it won't make you non-eligible for at least at State, our two primary career position types for PMFs, which are foreign affairs officers and program analysts. So maybe on that note, we could talk a little bit about.
If I could just add one thing.
Yeah, please.
If you're interested, so most of us aren't PMF STEMs. If you're interested in more about that program, OPM is holding I think it's an in-person discussion or some sort of Google discussion next week on the 30th, and they'll probably be able to answer a lot more questions about the specifics of the program. But I'll also say there are other science technology folks at State, all over State. There are the AAAS fellows, which I think are more geared towards PhDs. But there are lots of jobs at State where a science or a technology background would be really helpful. So would love to have you guys apply.
Yes, we actually have a science and technology advising office in our Bureau of Economic Affairs. We have a Bureau of Energy and Natural Resources. We have a bureau that focuses on telecom policy and intellectual property. And so we have such a broad span that I think that you'd still be able to find offices that do work that is really relevant to your background. So I'm curious to hear from any of you what you think the benefits of working at State or USAID are relative to working at other federal agencies. I know that was something that somebody was interested previously, so maybe we could hear from a State person, a USAID person, then a State person. Looks like Greg, you're ready to roll.
Yes, I'm ready. So I thought about this a lot, is why I jumped in, and I think the first impression I got when I thought about working at State or USAID was how much of it is internationally focused, because there's two agencies that focus much more so on international work than others. And I found that compared to other agencies that I spoke with, that international focus is really special. And so it may sound a bit generic to say so, but I don't think it should be undervalued, that the chance to either collaborate with folks working abroad, or go abroad for work, or support those who are working abroad from DC is really, I think, pretty incredible opportunity in the public service domain. And I also think that it provides a chance to expose yourself to lots of different types of work. And by that I mean that, at least in USAID, there are people working on energy projects, water projects, human rights projects around the world. And because they're doing them in other countries, they usually have their own pretty interesting perspective. And because they're working in missions abroad, they usually have a pretty interesting view of that country or that issue. And so that sort of diversity of experiences and perspectives is what I think makes it unique. And it's one reason why it's always fun to speak with anyone in the building at any point about what they're doing, because I can guarantee they're going to be doing something that's interesting and probably different from what you're doing, which is, I think, pretty great.
And if I may, I can kind of add the State perspective to that as well. So I started about 3 months ago. I guess today is kind of my 3-month birthday as a PMF at State. And echoing what Greg said, I was foreign policy and diplomacy, that's really what drives me. That's kind of my passion. But what I was pleasantly surprised at when I came into state was how much of a family it is. And you can see by this panel that we're kind of mixed in between state and USAID. And even though we have our kind of like internal quarrels every now and then, like it really is a family. I went through the civil service orientation course in early July, and something that really strikes out in memory is that on my last day, when I was essentially taking the oath of office, Secretary Kerry was the one that swore in my class. And keep in mind that this was early July, so this was during the height of the Israeli-Palestinian crisis, roughly a day after the plane got shut down in Ukraine. And so just to see the Secretary at a ceremony for civil servants coming in was huge, and it really underscored the fact that like this is a family and we are all working for the same mission. So that's kind of my poll for state.
Oh man, that was so great. I feel inspired as well. I also want to talk about a couple really specific sort of tangible benefits. State and I think USAID, correct me if I'm wrong, State Department PMFs will both do 2 rotations. And that's a really great benefit. Now check it, because you know the requirements and the offerings vary year by year. So confirm this when if you were to get an offer from state. But I've had the opportunity to do an interagency rotation. I took 4 months and was at Treasury, which was really very interesting. And then I'll also do another short rotation internal to state, so at another office or in another bureau. Internal domestic to state. And I think that's a really fantastic thing, because I'm just starting out my career. I mean, I had a career before graduate school, but I really want to see a lot of different variety in the federal government, and state has so many different things that we're doing. We're anything from loan guarantees and really nerdy IMF stuff in my econ world, to high stakes negotiations internationally, to programming and rule of law issues. So really anything you can think of internationally, state is engaged on it in a lot of ways. And so I think it's fantastic being at an agency that does so many different things. So from the state perspective, that's really great. And I love that having 2 rotations lets me experience basically 2 different places in addition to the place where I was offered a job and where I'm intending to convert.
Yeah, I'll just kind of second everything that everyone else has said about kind of sort of the untangible things. Also what Elizabeth mentioned, the tangible things, the rotations are great, and the various opportunities to go on assignment to another agency, or to an overseas embassy, for example. A lot of PMFs from state and USAID do get to do those sorts of rotations. I think one of the most exciting aspects of my job and being a PMF at the State Department is, and this may sound silly, but our boss is on the front page of every major newspaper around the world every single day because of the incredible things that we all do, and what he represents, and what we as a department, as an agency at USAID, and as a nation, what we all represent. So that means a lot to me, that, and I truly believe that what we do and where we are and where we work is a force for good in this world. So I'm proud to be a part of that.
Oh, that's really awesome, guys. I will make one plug also for state, and that's maybe a little bit different than what anybody mentioned, which is that because of how much we do in so many different places, we're a 70,000 person organization operating in 200 countries, roughly. The logistical challenges associated with that are tremendous, and if you're if you're interested in the nuts and bolts of actually how it works, moving around all those people and making sure that the Secretary's plane lands on time, so that high stakes negotiation can occur. There's a lot of opportunity to work on things like that. They can be really mission critical, but also like extremely complex types of issues. So that can be a lot of fun. I really quickly, and maybe we could hear from Jason about what it's like at USAID, and then maybe Audrey again on what it's like at State. So somebody asked if we could give a brief description of what the program entails once accepted. So I think we've talked a little bit about the rotations. Maybe we could talk a little bit about the length of the program, some of the training requirements, and that type of thing. And I also really quickly do want to mention that somebody in the crowd actually mentioned that MPHs are no longer part of the PMF STEM track. So Juliana, thank you. So Jason, maybe take it away on kind of the scope of the program once you're actually accepted.
Sure. And as you may well know, there's stages of acceptance. You become a finalist, which starts a whole long process. Doesn't, I guess, have to be long, but can be long. A whole long process of finding an appointment. But once you become an appointment, that's really when your fellowship begins. And I actually just started in July. And so what then ensues is a 2-year fellowship program, at which point, and Neil could probably talk about this more, but at which point you typically will have the opportunity to convert to a permanent civil service employee. But throughout those 2 years, you have a number of great training opportunities. It's mandated that you receive 80 hours of training a year, and some agencies and offices will give you even more than that, but it's a really great credit to us. And I think in my experience, and I'm sure this is sort of a shared experience among us, offices I find really support PMFs in terms of sort of training and rotation opportunities. Again, it's a really known sort of commodity. It's a known fellowship, and they bring PMFs on for a reason. They really want to grow and groom these hopefully future managers in these different offices and bureaus. So I found that offices are really supportive of their PMFs. So you get a number of different training opportunities. Like just last Thursday, I went for a day-long training at Mount Vernon. OPM did basically a leadership training. My first, I would say, 3 weeks in, I did a private sector engagement training that was relevant to my position through USAID. It was a week-long training, 40 hours of training on private sector engagement. So there's this real push to get you sort of ramped up and trained up and really exposed to a lot of different parts of the agency in those first 2 years that I have seen. And then, of course, the really big component, which we've talked about some and probably we'll talk about more, the rotations. And I haven't gone on my first rotation yet, but have certainly been taking a lot of notes, asking a lot of questions of PMFs who have gone on the rotations, and that's an excellent opportunity to sort of get exposure, to build your network, and just to sort of improve. So it's a packed 2 years of really growing you and grooming you while you're in it. And I didn't mention, but someone can talk maybe more about too, the level increases sort of on the salary side too as you're going through the program.
Jason, thanks for that really great kind of comprehensive overview of the PMF tenure, as well as some of your experiences. I found that actually quite inspiring. I haven't done much training above and beyond the civil service orientation and the Mount Vernon, I guess, offsite that we had last week. I was about to say something. Oh, you mentioned the salary increases. So this is something that they kind of hammer in from day one when you start at State. Everybody, just about everybody, 99.9% of PMFs at State start off at GS9 Step 1. And following 1 year of experience, you are eligible for GS11 promotion. 1 year after that, you experience both a promotion as well as a potential conversion to GS-12. Now, depending on the position that you might be filling, you could potentially be promoted the year after that to a GS-13, but that again is depending on the career ladder. Though I remember, the one thing that I wanted to mention that Jason kind of touched on but didn't really explain much further is between the stage of becoming a finalist to the point where you're actually appointed and where you found that position can be really stressful. And for some of us, we were somewhat lucky in the fact that that period wasn't that long, but it can be very, very intense. And the way that I remember it, because it happened for me just barely a couple of months ago, from the time that you apply to the time that you find out that you're a finalist is roughly 8 to 10 months. And so by the time you finally find out that you're a finalist, I remember reflecting back and thinking that it was kind of like the Hunger Games, where all the contestants are in the arena and they're being lifted up, and all of a sudden you see that there's a cornucopia. There's very limited resources there, and everybody wants it. And so, and that I say, like, the point of me saying that is that, like, this is a process, and this is just the beginning, and it's a very exciting and a rewarding process, but it's definitely a commitment. And again, everybody on this panel, like, we have loved the process and the journey so far, but good luck, and may the odds be ever in your favor.
I'll say they are much more in your favor than the Hunger Games. Even in my year, 2013, I think the appointment rate for finalists was something like 30%. So there's no guarantee when you reach the finalist stage that you'll get a job anywhere. But it's not quite a fight to the death, and you definitely want to be collaborative. But so yeah, that process, it can definitely be stressful. It can also be exciting depending on the level of hiring that the federal government has. Your own sort of being willing, if you're willing to consider a broad range of jobs. So if you don't need, I had a friend who specifically wanted, I want to work on this one country and this one area. And obviously that's not, there's very low chances of that happening, and he ended his career as a finalist by timing out. But if you're open to new possibilities, if you're willing to look at, oh, maybe you've never thought about the Paul Muir Bureau, or maybe you've never thought about, oh, anti-narcotics, that could be interesting, right? There's a lot of really interesting programming going on there. So I think if you're flexible and you're open to new opportunities, it can also be a really exciting time. But yes, it is definitely stressful as well.
And I'll jump in here. I didn't know if this was a good time to talk about sort of the finalist period, but I sort of have, I guess, the other extreme of the finalist experience. Like Elizabeth, I'm also a 2013, but I'm starting around the same time as a lot of the 2014 PMFs. It took quite a while, almost up until the 1-year eligibility deadline for me to find an appointment. And it wasn't for lack of trying, and it wasn't for lack of sort of opportunity. I had a number of interviews. It's just at any point you might be in a top handful, but for whatever different reasons, you're with a lot of equally talented and expert colleagues who are sort of being considered. All that to say, I guess the advice I would give, if you have the honor and the benefit of finding yourself as a finalist, and it really is, even as you're going through this sort of maybe Hunger Games feeling, it really is an honor to be, and people will remind you of that. Because what you really have, and people can explain this a little bit more perhaps, but what you really have is a card. You have the opportunity to be considered sort of in a non-compete status for positions. So there's a lot of offices that will directly recruit for a PMF position, but sometimes there's offices that don't even really know that they need it or want a PMF, and it's just sort of through your networking and talking to them that they have a position they're trying to open up, and open it up as a PMF as easily as they can open up anything, and they might open it up as a PMF position, and you can apply for that. So I would say during that sort of year of eligibility, definitely keep your networking up strong, talking to other finalists, other PMFs. A lot of the sort of interviews or opportunities I got were through other PMFs linking me, and I'm talking about finalists now, linking me to positions that weren't a good fit for them, but they knew me. They thought it'd be a good fit for me. And I would say definitely keep up with the people who are interested in you, even if they tell you, hey, we like you, but we don't have anything right now. 2013 was a tough time. That was the time of the government shutdown, the sequester. They took in a lot less PMFs, as I understand, in 2013 than they had years prior. Having said that, there's a lot of offices that you go to, and you have a conversation something like, I really want to work for you in your office, and they have a response something like, we'd love to have you, but we just don't know if we have the space or the money right now. Keep up with those people, because I can't tell you how much the opportunity happens where those people will circle back around months later and say, hey, we just got the funding, we can now interview. That actually happened for me. They did a little bit too late. I was able to take this great position, but keep up with those. Through even sometimes it's months you'll be keeping up with them, but they'll circle back around if they like you, and they'll bring you in for interview. It's just a little bit of practical encouragement.
I would add a couple of things as well. First, on the previous subject of pay scale, one of the wonderful things about USAID is that not everyone comes in at a level above GS9, but it's more common to come in at GS11 if you have some sort of specialized knowledge, like a degree in economics, that they're seeking for that specific position. So as you're looking around for different opportunities, keep your eyes out for GS11 USA positions, because that's a neat opportunity to come in at a higher level. And then if you do that, your first year GS11, then your second year you have the opportunity to promote to GS12, and then if you convert, you are eligible to convert to GS13 in your third year. That's a neat ladder if you're interested. And one quick note from before, I left out something from my answer about why USAID. I think State and USAID are both wonderful organizations. What drew me to USAID in particular was an emphasis on hands-on programs abroad, to getting your hands dirty, proverbially speaking. So if that's something that you find yourself more interested in, and that speaks to, I think, development in general, that's maybe one thing that could differentiate the two organizations in your search. But you really can't go wrong between the two, in my opinion.
I will say that that difference between the 9 and the 11 will follow you for the rest of your career, so that is a definite plus. If you're qualified at the 11, to not have to take the bump down to the 9 is great. That is one of the more painful things at State.
So I actually understand that there are other agencies that do start their PMFs at 11 and will negotiate on steps. It's always been the position of the State and USAID's HR, essentially, that we have attractive programs because of the rotational opportunities, and we don't have a hard time attracting talented people. So they haven't always been super flexible about where people start. But that is to say, I think it was mentioned earlier that based on your career ladder, you could go up to a 13. I spoke with the PMF coordinator recently on this issue, and it's now their policy that all PMFs hired at the State Department will be on a ladder to a GS13, which is great, and a huge win, I think, for us. I was hoping, kind of briefly, that somebody, maybe Neil, you could talk about the rotations that you did and how you got them.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, and then if there are any lingering questions that people have, feel free to post them on the event Google Hangout page. But Neil, maybe you could take us away here.
Sure. Just kind of briefly on rotations, there are a couple main ways you can secure your rotation or developmental assignment, I think is the official term for it. What that is basically a detail from your home office or your home bureau to another office or bureau or even an agency altogether. The two main ways to do that are to look on the PMF websites at State USAID. There's a PMF Central website where a lot of these get posted by other PMFs, offices, or Central HR. and just kind of going through that process and looking for the announcements that get pushed out on the listserv. That's the more official way. And then there's an unofficial way, which I got both of my rotations that way, is just sort of use your network and talk to people, and you sort of leverage that to see what's available and also see who can use a PMF in their office. Pretty much everybody or any office at State or USAID can use the labor and can use, again, the highly motivated talent that we bring to the table. So very rarely is someone going to say, no, we don't want free labor for 4 or 5 months. So you can always, or I would say usually, negotiate or again, sort of see what's available out there and talk to the people and to the offices and bureaus that you're interested in, and secure a rotation that way. With us at State and Aid, there are a couple, 2 or 3 sort of different ways or different types of rotations you can go on, being a domestic agency rotation where you stay inside the building. Those are relatively easy to secure. There's also overseas rotations where you go work for an embassy for a few months, particularly in the summer months when there's a lot of turnover, and they like to use PMFs as sort of a stopgap. Those are a little harder to secure, only because there's some funding issues that are involved, but definitely not impossible at all. It happens all the time. And then the other sort of third category is an interagency rotation, which some of the other panelists have mentioned doing. I think Elizabeth, you mentioned doing that. So those are your 3 options, and then your 2 ways of kind of getting secure in those rotations.
Awesome. Thanks, Neil. I would just add that the PMF program has a really good reputation, and when you're a finalist, if you email people, they'll most likely respond to you when they find out that you're a PMF finalist. Similarly, when you're actually a PMF at an agency interested in rotations, aim high, and you'll be able to email just about anybody, and they'll get back to you, at least for coffee or something like that. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I just want to make a note that we're an employee group. We don't represent in any official capacity the State Department or the U.S. Agency for International Development. We represent ourselves as current PMFs that want to be able to put some information out there, but this isn't official. So please, don't assume that we speak on behalf of OPM or our respective agencies. If you do have other questions that you think we may be able to help with, you could shoot an email to State USAID PMFs, which is the host of this Google Hangout, or you could actually post to the Google Hangout page itself. But in the meantime, thank you everybody for joining us, and please let us know if this was helpful.